And I'm jump right in here. Also, just looking at the schedule. Um, a few people emailed me about the idea matrix. So if you struggled with that and you need a little bit more time, that's okay. Just try to get it to me, probably like tomorrow, so I can give you some feedback as quickly as possible. Everybody that turned one in, really good. All your feedback should be already back, unless you submitted it in the last couple of hours. So just make sure to go and check your grades to see what the feedback for any of those were, for both the clustering, the mapping, and for the idea matrix. Today, it's going to be fairly short. We're going to focus on thesis statements. And almost everything that I'm going to say today is probably something you've heard before in another English course at JCC, or possibly in high school as well. But it really is super, super important to understand how critical having a strong thesis statement is. It's going to impact so much of your writing. So if it's something that you've struggled with, definitely rewatch this as many times as you need to. Go back and reread any of the readings as many times as you need to, because it's really key that you understand this, especially moving forward as our essay topics become more and more complex. And then we start to use more outside sources to support what we're talking about. The stronger your thesis statement is, the easier it's going to be to write these kinds of essays. All right. So today we're going to focus on these three ones from the readings. And again, if you go to Blackboard, you go to learning modules, we're in module 1 still, and then the module content, and then the essay 1 content. All right. I know it's a lot of clicks to get to this one here. So just the essay 1 content. And so we have characteristics of a strong thesis, thesis sentence, topic and angle examples, and then developing a working thesis. So all three of these are related to each other. Some of them are a little bit of overlapping, but they're all really important information about thesis statements. So this first one, characteristics of a strong thesis. I'm not going to read through all of this, but just think about all these main key points. A strong thesis is non-obvious, right? So something that's just not obvious will probably make a better thesis statement than something that is just painfully obvious. If your thesis statement is eating too much fast food is bad for your health. Well, that's pretty obvious. Everybody knows you shouldn't eat a lot of fast food. It's not really healthy food. It's not chock full of the nutrients and vitamins that we need. It's got a lot of extra fat and carbohydrates and things like that. So everybody knows you shouldn't eat a lot of fast food, right? So that's obvious. So how could you take something like that you wanted to write about and write about it in a way that doesn't sound so obvious, right? And then you want to think about that. Again, whatever your essay topics are, it's going to change. So I can't tell you how to change it from something that's obvious to less obvious. You want to think about your individual topics, right? The example they use here is sustainability is important, right? And obviously, sustainability is something that's important. If we never think about sustainability, we're going to run out of fresh water. We're going to run out of trees for paper and lumber and all these kinds of things. So it's kind of a no-brainer that sustainability is important, right? So it's obvious. So how would you take that and make it not so obvious? Well, one way is to think about it making your thesis statement arguable, right? And arguable doesn't mean that you're yelling and screaming and throwing chairs Jerry Springer style, right? It just means that it's something that someone could logically disagree with. There is a valid alternate perspective, a logical, valid alternate perspective, right? So when you think about something that's arguable, then it helps a little bit more. So instead of just saying sustainability is important, think about something more like this one. Sustainability policies will inevitably fail if they do not incorporate social justice. Well, now that one's a little different. It's very, very different than just sustainability is important, right? So now it's making it arguable because someone could say, I disagree with that. And this is why I disagree with that. So you can kind of have a debate about it. It's now arguable, right? So we're getting a little bit better here. And they say it brings up some healthy skepticism, right? So this is good. So now it's arguable and it's something that hopefully the reader would want to keep reading, right? A strong thesis is also specific, right? It's well specified. You don't want to say something that's too broad that really would be the thesis for an entire book, right? If you have a thesis statement that says something like, the environment is important. Well, for who? Is it important for humans? Is it important for certain kinds of animals, for insects, for mammals, for the plant life on the planet, for the ocean life? It's way too broad, right? That would be a series of books if your thesis was the environment is important, right? But if you say human beings are the main cause of destroying our ecosystem in upstate New York or in northern New York or wherever you are right now. Well, that's a little bit more specific, right? Now you're talking about the environment, but specifically about the human impact on the environment in a specific area of a specific country in the United States, right? So now you're talking only about, upstate New York or northern New York, or you could even say the Lake Ontario shore of northern New York. Very specific, right? Now you can write a paper about that. You're not going to have to write a whole book full of information and support for something like that because your thesis is now arguable and it's more specific, right? Really key, moving on. Make sure your thesis is supportable, right? You can't have an arguable thesis that's specific, but there's no way to support it, right? And support doesn't always mean using scholarly articles or using books or web sources. Support can just come from examples from your own personal life as well, and many times, especially in this essay. So you want to use any kind of examples you can think of, any kind of details that would support that thesis, that would support that main idea. Any kind of observations, anything that you've seen, heard, listened to, read, any of those things can be used to support a thesis statement, right? So there's really no limit in terms of what kinds of things will help you support a thesis statement. And then finally, a strong thesis statement includes implications, right? This one might be a little bit different, but if you think about an implication in terms of there is a reason why you would want to read this, something is important because of this, right? That's why in college you don't write about, your favorite family vacation or what you did over summer break or winter break, right? Because there's no implication. No one really cares what you did for summer break, right? Maybe conversationally your friends do, but it doesn't have an impact on anything outside of yourself, right? So there's no real implications. So think about in terms of your thesis statements, it has to be specific. It's going to be something that's arguable. It's going to be something you can support, and it's going to be something that is interesting to people other than you. It includes some kind of implication, right? It's something that you would hope people want to keep thinking about after they've done reading your essay. And if you do all 5 of those, you'll probably have a really strong thesis statement. And if you make sure that all of your body paragraphs support the thesis statement, you'll have a pretty strong essay. So all these things always kind of work in tandem with one another. You have a strong thesis statement. If you have good topic sentences that support the thesis statement, good topic sentences. If you have good details that support your topic sentences, that's going to support your main idea, your thesis. So they always work kind of hand in hand like that. One way to arrive at a strong thesis, this one's probably new, right? And this is called 3-story theses, all right? So there's different kinds of levels. Think about like stories on a building, all right? So it says 1 story is an inarguable fact, right? So a really lame thesis statement would just be something that's inarguable, something that's too obvious, that's basic, right? A 2-story one now brings in something that's arguable, right? They say interpretive or analytical. It could be any type of arguable. And again, don't think of arguing as someone has to be like angrily opposed to what you're saying. Someone could just logically have a different opinion about it, right? That's the argument you're looking for. And then a 3-story thesis, it says it nests that point within its larger compelling implications, right? So not only are you arguing about something, you're arguing about this thing, and you're making sure to include conversation about why this is important, all right? So it's the way to build up to the strongest possible thesis statement, right? So look at these examples that help you clarify what the 3 stories mean. So the basic one, 1st-story thesis. This is the kind of thesis statement you would have written in like high school, all right? It says online learning is becoming more prevalent and takes many different forms. Really? Duh, right? It's so basic. It's so, yes, that's just a truth. You're pointing out something that is obviously true, right? Online learning is becoming more prevalent and it's taking different forms, right? Right now, you guys are on a live online class, right? It's an online course, but it starts at a certain time, right? So that changes it versus a fully online class or a hybrid online class where we meet face-to-face in the classroom one day and then virtually another day, right? We all know online learning is becoming more prevalent, right? COVID kind of forced that. It was already growing and then COVID happened and it made it grow really, really fast, right? So it's too obvious, right? And it's also obvious that it takes many forms. Anyone that's currently going to college and has taken an online class probably knows this, right? It's too obvious. But let's say you really wanted to write about online learning, right? Instead of abandoning that idea, build up that thesis, make it a stronger thesis. So now we have this second story one. While most observers see it as a transformation of higher education, online learning is better thought of as an extension of higher education, and that it reaches learners who aren't disposed to participate in traditional campus-based education. That's a lot bigger, right? Now you're actually saying something. Not just that it's growing, you have an opinion about why it's growing. Someone else could logically disagree with that. Maybe they say it's growing for a different reason than you're saying, right? So you're saying it reaches learners who aren't disposed to participate in traditional campus-based education. And this could be people that have children at home where they can't go to campus, right? That's one group of people that wouldn't be able to participate in on-campus stuff because they have children to take care of, right? Someone who has no transportation and cannot make it to campus. If they have some kind of physical disability where it's hard for them to come to campus, maybe online learning is going to be better suited for them, right? So they're not saying that it's transforming higher ed. It's really just an extension of college. So now it's an opinion. It's something that is arguable. But to make people really care, move on to that third story, right? Make sure there's some kind of implication. So online learning appears to be a promising way to better integrate higher education with other institutions in society. As online learners integrate their educational experiences with other realms of their life, promoting the freer flow of ideas between the academy and the rest of society. And I know for a lot of people, that's a big leap. Are they still talking about the same thing? And they are, but now they've included kind of an angle and an implication, right? So if you look at kind of their little descriptor, it says it has a topic and an angle. The angle is arguable, supportable, and well specified. And the angle contains implications that set the argument within a broader context. And this sounds really complicated, but think about your own essay topic and see if you can do the same kind of thing. No matter what your essay topic is, one, do you mention a main idea? Do you have a topic and do you have an angle? Is it arguable? Is it supportable? And then ultimately, are you writing about it in such a way that the implications of that topic are going to be easy to understand, right? The impact of it, whether the impact of knowing about it or not knowing about it. If you're writing about something that needs to be changed, what happens if we don't make these changes? What happens if we do make these changes? There's all these different ways to think about the implications based on your topic and what it is you actually want to talk about. So it can be difficult to think about it as a concept, but when you think about it from just the purpose of your own thesis statements, it's a little bit easier to do, all right? Look at another example. So this one is scientists disagree about the likely impact in the United States of the light brown apple moth, an agricultural pest native to Australia, right? And it's got a topic, it's got an angle, but it's really super broad, right? Even if we know nothing about these things, and I've never heard of the light brown apple moth until I read this example, right? But that's all that it's saying, right? And the little descriptor here, it says it has a topic and an angle. The angle is supportable, but the angle is broad. The angle would be more interesting if it offered an argument about an issue related to the light brown apple moth. Because here they're just saying scientists disagree about the impact. Okay, what about that, right? What do they want to say about that? And this is likely the first version of the thesis statement. And as they read more and as they wrote a little bit of the essay, it could slowly start to change as they really figure out what it is they're talking about. So we look at their second story thesis. Research findings to date suggest that the decision to spray pheromones over the skies of several Southern Californian counties to combat the light brown apple moth was poorly thought out. Well, now we're getting pretty specific, right? Now they're talking about not just scientists disagree about the impact. They're saying, well, there's been some research that kind of suggests the decision to spray these pheromones over Southern California to combat the invasive species was poorly thought out. Well, that tells me that something went wrong here. There are some other implications about these pheromones they were spraying that they didn't think about. They didn't think about some kind of lasting impact or some kind of very dangerous impact possibly. So they're getting closer. They're hinting at an implication. Not quite there yet, though. So then third story. Together, the scientific ambiguities and the controversial response strengthen the claim that industrial style approaches to pest management are inherently unsustainable. Like, okay, there's definitely an implication here. There is something that they found out about these light brown moths and the spraying of the pheromones, and there's some bad stuff that they're going to talk about, right? So now there's an implication here. They're not telling us what it is yet, but they're telling us there is an implication, right? You don't have to use the word, the implication of this is this. But if it helps you think about it that way, think about it that way. All right.
So, hello?
Yes.
So, quick question. Would it also help to like give a more specific like scientific institution? Like,
if it happens, like if it's something you find, it could be. But remember, again, your thesis statement is going to be the main idea for the entire essay. So if you
Okay.
really talk about one specific institution, for example, in your thesis statement, that actually limits you to really only being able to talk about that one specific institution.
Oh, okay.
So it's not bad, but it could be limiting. So another good example, if you look at the second story one here, because they specifically say over the skies of several Southern Californian counties, this limits them to only talking about Southern California counties. So if they wanted to talk about Oregon or Washington or Texas, it would technically be off topic. Does that make sense?
So you don't want it like too broad, but you don't want it too specific either.
Yep. Yeah. It's like the, the bears, you want to find that perfect medium right in between, that perfect porridge, and it's tough because there's no correct way to tell you how to find that perfect medium because there's so many variables, right? But think about it in terms of, is this something I could write 3 or 4 pages about, or is it something I'd have to write 300 pages about? What's kind of the in between, Good question. Really good question.
Thank you. I was just wondering real quick.
Yeah. Thanks, Andrew.
Yeah, no problem.
This one, I just like this because this is just examples. This is a thesis, sentence, topic, and angle examples. Again, I don't like the term thesis sentence because your thesis could be more than one sentence, but they use it for the textbook. But you look at these and they're just kind of really, really short, brief explanations, right? It says, this is not a thesis. It says, in this paper, I'm writing about current scientific research on cancer, right? So we have a topic, current scientific research on cancer, right? But what's the angle, right? What's the focused idea about this research? All they said so far is I'm writing a paper about something that exists. That's all that this is saying, right? You're not doing anything with that. So instead, add an angle to it. Current scientific research on cancer suggests that there are specific environmental factors that trigger specific types of cancer. Oh, okay. You're not just going to talk about, I read a bunch of stuff about cancer, right? You're saying current scientific research suggests that there are environmental factors that trigger certain types of cancer, right? Very, very different. Now they've got a specific angle for the topic about cancer, right? So it's much better. So it's got a topic, it's got an angle, and then it says what they do is they call it the promise, right? Because your thesis statement is basically what your paper is about. So it's kind of a promise to the reader that you're going to find out the answers to this. So this one says, the essay will offer evidence on specific environmental triggers for specific cancers. And that's exactly what you're going to do if you write that paper, right? If this is your thesis statement, that's exactly what you're going to do, right? I can envision this topic in every paragraph would probably be a different type of environmental factor and how it triggers a different or a specific type of cancer, right? Maybe one is about specific carcinogens if you live near like a nuclear power plant. And another one is if you live near a coal mine. And another one is if you live near an oil refinery or something like that, right? I can see each one of these being its own different paragraph. So a different environmental factor that triggers a different specific type of cancer, right? And if you can just envision those things in your head when you think of your thesis statement, then it makes it easier to do all those other things that you have already done, right? For this essay, because you've chosen something that you're interested in or something you know a lot about, you didn't have to think too hard about this, right? When you did all of your different pre-writings, it was pretty easy. Free writing was pretty simple. Brainstorming a list was pretty simple. Doing a little cluster diagram was pretty simple. So all of these things were pretty easy to do because you already knew about these things. But as writing gets more difficult, as we get more complex and our topics are about things you might not know a lot about, it's harder to make sure you're on track with your thesis initially. So you always want to think about these things, always go back and forth, like we talked about last time, right? If you have your thesis, if it's a working thesis, it's not going to be finalized until you really write the rest of the paper. So always be thinking about your topic, your angle, and then what your thesis is promising to the reader. Just another example. If my thesis statement is, are probiotics good for us? Well, that's just a question. That's not a statement, right? So you want to really get away from asking questions as a thesis statement. A lot of us were taught to do this as a way to introduce our topic, right? So if you wrote this, you would say, are probiotics good for us? Well, I've done some research and I don't think they are. So you use the question as a way to bring up your main point. And it's really kind of a lazy writing way to do it. You don't want to do that anymore. It might have worked in high school. Get away from that now. Don't ask questions just as a way to raise your statement. Just make your statement, right? So here we have a topic, probiotics, right? But the angle, I don't know. Yes, they are good for us, or no, they're not. We have no idea right now, right? Because it's a very poorly written thesis. But instead, and not just because it's longer, though that typically helps, it says probiotics offer general benefits related to maintaining good digestive health, as they help maintain useful bacteria in the digestive tract. However, many claims as to other benefits of probiotics, such as lower blood pressure and lower cholesterol, have not been scientifically proven, right? So their answer to this question is sort of, right? But it depends. It says research has basically shown that probiotics can be good for maintaining good digestive health, right? If you have a bunch of stomach issues, maybe probiotics are really good for you, right? If you have colon issues, maybe probiotics are good for you. Anything about the digestive system, right? But any claims that probiotics are good for lowering blood pressure, lowering cholesterol, don't really have any scientific basis, right? But now this is very clear what this paper is going to talk about, right? They're going to talk about how, yes, this is true, and how, nope, it doesn't really do these things, right? Much more clear than, are probiotics good for us, right? So again, we have a topic, we have an angle, and we have a promise, right? It's really clear, and it should be very clear once you read a thesis statement, what the topic is, what the angle is, and what the paper is going to do, what that promise is, right? If you can't answer these three simple questions on your thesis statement, you're doing something wrong. It should be obvious what your topic is. It should be obvious what your angle is. And it should be very clear what you're promising the reader you're going to do within that essay. All right. Just one more example from here. So bad thesis. My husband and I decided that we are both messy people. Like, okay, so our topic is messiness, but what's the point, right? You're just saying, oh, we have realized something is true. Really? Might as well make your thesis statement. Water is wet, grass is green, right? It's just obvious. It's not a thing. You're just saying something exists. So instead, although my husband defines messy differently than I do, we both agree that messiness resides in 4 qualities of mind, which we both unfortunately seem to share, right? And I don't know what these things are, right? But now I can see, oh, they're going to talk about these different types of messiness. So they're both messy, but there's something specific about these 4 qualities of mind that constitutes different types of messiness, right? So we have a topic of being messy. We have an angle about these 4 qualities of messiness. So the promise is they're going to explain what these 4 qualities of messiness are, right? It's a very informative kind of paper about messiness. So it's not really about this husband and wife. It's really about these different types of messiness, right? They're just using a personal example as a way to introduce the idea of these different qualities of messiness in the mind, right? Pause real quick. Any questions about these examples going from the bad one to the much better one? All right. So this is just developing a working thesis. This is the last one in that Wakelet. And the really key part is really just all of these questions here. All right. So this is kind of a good way to kind of recheck your thesis to make sure you're forming it in the right way or you're revising it in the right way. So the first one, it says, what assertion do I want to make about this topic, right? Are you saying something about your topic? You're not, instead of just like these other ones, are probiotics good for us? You're not saying anything about it. You're just asking a question. That's not a good assertion, right? So what assertion do I want to make about this topic? Almost all of you, when you started writing these, you knew why you wanted to write about it. You had this idea, you wanted to say something about the topic, right? That's your assertion. And then think about, does this assertion reflect my own thoughts and insights about this topic? Most likely the answer to this is yes, right? Whatever you're asserting, whatever you're claiming in your thesis statement, you probably kind of agree with that. They're probably mirroring your own thoughts about the topic. Otherwise, you'd be writing against yourself the entire time. And that's pretty hard to do. Is it just one main idea? And this could be a little tricky because sometimes you could start with one main idea and you kind of accidentally branch into a bunch of different ones, right? For a lot of you, if you had a very detailed mind map or cluster diagram, I might have even suggested, well, I can see where you have like these 4 amazing points, but you could probably write 3 or 4 pages just using 2 of those points because you almost have 2 main ideas competing against each other, right? Nothing wrong with that. You're just going to end up having to write like an 8-page paper if you really want to cover all of those main ideas. And most of you don't want to do that, right? So make sure you can reduce it down so you really just have one main idea for your thesis statements. Is it arguable? For this essay, not all of your thesis statements will be arguable. Almost all of them are, but they don't have to be for this one. This is specifically moving forward as we really focus on integrating argument writing, using outside sources to support our opinions. Now we're going to focus a lot more, or moving forward, we're going to focus a lot more on arguable thesis statements. But most of you right now have one already. Is it specific, right? Again, not too broad, right? Don't say candy is tasty. Well, you could write a whole book about that. I've seen a whole documentary about candy, right? Way too broad. Make it specific, narrow it down to something specific. If you have one main idea, you're probably going to be specific enough, right? And then if it's not working with what you were trying to say, how can you revise it? Maybe you started writing, you had a thesis statement, and then you start writing the essay. And as you develop the essay, the thesis doesn't really say what the essay is saying now, right? Is it still saying what you wanted it to say? If not, tweak a little bit, revise it a little bit. Basically, go back over the essay content, look at your topic sentences and your body paragraphs and say, okay, what is my main point? What is the one main idea that all of these body paragraphs are actually supporting? And just rework the thesis until you find that, right? And then at the very least, make sure that your thesis still has a topic and it has an angle, right? Don't just say something about something. Don't just say, oh, this thing exists, right? Computers are getting cheaper. Well, yeah, they are, duh. Technology in general gets cheaper and cheaper every year because it becomes more affordable. More people buy it. It drives the cost of it down, blah, 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 that stuff, right? So it doesn't really say anything, right? So instead, what's that angle there, right? You could say, if you're saying technology and about how it's becoming more affordable, maybe your angle is because technology is becoming more affordable, because computers becoming more affordable, more people in impoverished parts of cities are able to have access to the internet, right? Now it's something. Now you have an angle, right? Because if you don't have access to the internet, can you imagine trying to survive in today's world? I can't. I mean, we wouldn't be doing this right now without technology and access to technology. So if I'm talking about how making technology cheaper is good for, for social mobility, because now someone who's grown up poor might actually have access to online education, right? Very, very different versus, well, I live, 3 hours away. There's no way I could drive to campus. I can't get there and I can't afford a computer. I can't afford a car. I guess I'll never go to school, right? And you could talk about all those kinds of things. But all these questions, as you're writing your essay, kind of go back to this a couple of times. Make sure that your thesis statements, that you're able to answer these questions about your thesis statements. Because if you really focus on that thesis statement, then everything else will kind of fall into place, right? You have all those other forms of pre-writing. You have the mapping, you have the idea matrix. All of those will help guide the organization, right? So that tells you what to put into each of your body paragraphs. It kind of tells you what your topic sentences for those body paragraphs are going to be. So as long as they're all still answering all these questions for your thesis statement, it's going to be one cohesive unit. Your thesis statement will guide the main idea. Your topic sentences will guide each of the body paragraphs, and all together, they'll add up to good support for your thesis statement. So they all work together like that. So I say this much, I talk about thesis statements for what, 30 minutes straight, even though they take up such a short piece of your essay because they are that important. If you are lacking a thesis statement, or if your thesis statement doesn't really define the topic, the angle, or the promise of what the essay is going to be about, the essays are typically kind of shaky, right? Maybe not a total train wreck, but a little bit of shaky. If you don't have a good thesis, what you'll end up doing is you'll have a bunch of paragraphs that aren't really related to one another, right? They're probably about the same topic, but they're not really supporting the same angle. So therefore, you're not really fulfilling any promise to the reader, right? So if you struggle with making a clear, concise thesis statement, you're probably going to struggle with making sure your paragraphs fit together as well. And it's much easier to fix it when you're just working on a sentence or two for a thesis statement. That's why you should spend a lot of time making sure you're developing your thesis statement, and you keep double checking to make sure this is actually what you're writing about. All right. So for this one, I want to make sure it's really clear for the assignment. If you go back to the module 1, the assignments folder. So we have this one, it's called a thesis exercise. This one, well, I'll just read this here. It says, complete the attached thesis exercise handout. When done, upload your document to Blackboard. These thesis statements are not related to your essay topic. They're only practice that will show me if you understand how to create a strong thesis statement, right? So this is purely practice for thesis statements. It really has nothing to do with your essay topics. It's just to show me what you understand about thesis statements so far. So just, download this document. And I got to share it with you, I think. Oh, come on. So we have this. So it looks just like this. So it says all the samples below are basic thesis statements. Try to make each basic thesis sentence stronger. Applying the characteristics of a strong thesis and aiming for a 2 or a 3-story thesis as your goal, right? If you can get it from a 2nd to a 3rd story thesis, really good. Remember, that's where you add in that implication. If you're still really struggling with implication, at least make sure that it's a 2nd story thesis, right? That you have a clear topic, that you have a clear angle, and that it's arguable. So this one, attending college as an adult student is difficult, right? Really, really lame. It's really vague, doesn't tell us a lot. They're just kind of saying something. It is technically arguable, right? But they need to be more specific than just difficult, right? And even adult student. Well, what does that mean for you? Maybe adult student is a student that's 18. You're technically an adult. Do you mean it's harder for an 18-year-old than a 15-year-old? That doesn't make any sense, right? Oh, do you mean someone that's like had a bunch of kids, worked in a bunch of different areas, and now they're 55 and coming back to school? That's a very different adult student. Or do you mean a 35-year-old adult student that has no kids and no family? That's a very different adult student, right? So much about this thesis statement is just too vague, way too broad. And then there's kind of a little brief analysis for what you could do to make it a 2nd or a 3rd story thesis, right? Then all you're going to do is write your version of the thesis here. So it says, write your improved thesis here. And just literally on this document, just type it up right here. And do the same thing for these two, right? So all 3 of these thesis statements need some work, right? And then the information here is kind of going to help guide you towards a stronger 2nd or 3rd story thesis statement. So that's all you're doing is just writing 3 different thesis statements. It shouldn't take you too long, but it'll show me if you really understand that 2nd and 3rd story thesis. If you really understand how to make something argumentative, if you understand how to make sure there's some kind of implication, that there's a reason why someone would care to know about this stuff, right? Then when you're done with that, just save the file. And then come back to Blackboard and just upload it here for thesis exercise. All right. Any questions about that one? All right. It should be pretty simple. If you struggle with it, that's okay. Let me know. If you want to make sure you're doing it right and you want to email me and say, hey, I think this is what I'm supposed to do. Here's what I was thinking for the first thesis statement. And I'll be able to tell you right away if you're on the right track or not. So if you really struggle with it, that's okay. Just let me know and make sure you get the help that you need. All right. So So that one you want to submit by Wednesday morning, right? So it doesn't say it on here, but the essay is due next Monday. So you should probably get started working on it. I know a lot of people kind of wait till the last minute. You're a really good procrastinator, and that's okay. It happens if it works well for you. But you want to try to get out of the habit of that. Again, and I've said this like 3 times already, but as your essays get more complex, as they get longer, as you have to do a lot more outside reading and research, you really can't write an essay in one sitting anymore, right? This one you probably could. You could probably sit down and just hammer it out in a couple of hours, especially because most of you, or the vast majority of you, have a bunch of really good pre-writing to pull from already, right? But as we move forward, that's going to be more difficult, right? But I want you to focus on your thesis statements. I want to make sure that you really understand how to write them. And then on Wednesday, instead of going over more stuff, I'm just going to give you that class time to work on the essay itself. All right. So on Wednesday, I won't be holding a live class, but if you're working on the essay and you have questions, I'll be sitting at my computer. Right. So if you wanted to meet through Zoom, we could meet through Zoom. If you want to just email me, ask me some questions, you could do that. I'm just not going to have any live class on Wednesday because I really want you to be able to focus on your essay. Right. So I won't see you Wednesday, but then the essay is going to be due next Monday morning, right? Monday, the 8th, right? So don't forget about that, right? Again, this one I said 8 o'clock in the morning. This one, especially with the essay, I can be a little more lenient with it. If you wake up Monday and you want to put some final touches on it, that's perfectly fine with me. I probably won't start grading these till Tuesday anyway. So you can have some more leeway with the due date time on this one here, all right? Questions about your homework or what you're doing until I see you next time. All right. Well, again, if you have questions, shoot me an email, let me know. And if you don't, just knock out your essay, do well on it, and have a good weekend. I'll see you next week.
Have a good weekend.